far as you can. Watch this now before they take it down. Quick, and share this as far as you can.
Sure. Let's first start with the power and the role of the United States government and the CIA and the FBI. As I said, my time in the military, I found that America's biggest enemies, they weren't jihadis. It's not the Russians, not the Chinese. It's our own institutions. And as I look back, I've found that perhaps the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, one of the worst institutions in human history, founded by an Irish Roman Catholic Wall Street lawyer, part of the DuPont military profiteering criminal escapades of World War I and earlier. William Donovan, that was blown up by papist press as a hero because he was given a Medal of Honor from World War I, and I've read his Medal of Honor citation. I'm not impressed. I don't think that it merited a Medal of Honor. Founded the OSS, and into that, the CIA, the list of people involved, and what I have found is that Jews are put up as managers, but the real decision makers end up being Catholics, Jesuit trained, somehow connected to the Catholic Church. And I have a small running list of people in the CIA that, not necessarily in particular order: Acting Director Michael Morrill, Jesuit educated; Vernon Walters, Jesuit educated; Walter Bedell Smith, back OSS CIA early on. Wow, what an absolute traitor! Full on Catholic. James Woolsey, Counter-Reformation, Johns Oxford College; John Brennan, Fordham trained; John Owen Brennan. Wow, the drone executioner. We could do a whole show just on him. John McCone, Michael Hayden, William Casey, William Colby, Casey. We could go on and on about Colby in particular, part of Operation Phoenix. He was the Saigon station chief, and under him was John DeCamp. We could do a whole show just on that alone, of John DeCamp and the so-called Franklin cover-up, which was actually the Boys Town cover-up. Leon Panetta, who had no business being the Secretary of Defense and then the director of the CIA, a corrupt Italian Roman Catholic and nobody congressman, and look at all the power he's wielded. Director under Biden, William Burns from LaSalle Counter-Reformation, again, St. John's, Oxford. Michael Hayden again, Michael Schauer, Philip Agee, Ray McGovern. Oh, Ray McGovern, the big dissident that we see on Russia Today all the time. In particular, it's fascinating that it was the United States, secular United States, no separation of church and state, and yet the so-called global war on terror was started on the anniversary of the Crusader victory at Lepanto, which the Catholic Church has created as the change to the Feast of the Holy Rosary on October 7th. That's the Battle of Lepanto was 1571. Also interesting, October 7th is Vladimir Putin's birthday. It's also the birthday of Jesuit Superior General Vladimir Letokowski, who was personally responsible for both the Nazis and the Soviets. I've got some info on that. But fascinating to me that the so-called global war on terror would have such a Catholic Crusader beginning right after 9/11. What happened? It was used as a false flag to dramatically ratchet up the overwhelming power of the United States government. What was the blueprint? Who was used to write that blueprint? A Vietnamese Roman Catholic law professor named Viet Bong Dinh, not to be confused with Viet Minh, which was the North Vietnamese regulars during the Vietnam War, or maybe to be confused. Also, by coincidence, I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek, Ngo Dinh Diem, I don't know if they're related or not, was the first president of South Vietnam, and with only 7% of Vietnam being Catholic, he was Catholic. The vast majority of those who have religion in Vietnam are Buddhists or folklore, and isn't that odd that the very first president of South Vietnam, as a matter of fact, it was his influence that helped precipitate the Vietnam War, of a massive influx of Catholics out of the North and into the South towards their new president, because they felt they'd have a fair shake. I hear the bell, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop there.
Perfect. Wow. Okay, John. So we hear a long list of Catholic trained, Jesuit trained people in that list. I didn't hear one Jewish name. So can you please respond to that?
Well, I'm certainly not denying that there are other ethnic groups involved in wielding power, political power in the United States. That's not something I've ever claimed. I would just say that Jews play a leading role, and Jews are very, very, generally speaking, very, very concerned about Jewish interests, and they're very aware of their Jewish identity, much of which is framed around alleged historical persecution, epitomized by the alleged Holocaust story, of course. So that's what I would say, is that the organized Jewish community is the most organized and cohesive collective ethnic group operating in the United States. And they would deny that very same privilege or right to especially white Christians, to where, if you identify as a white Christian in America, you're some sort of racist, you're a white supremacist, you're a hater, you hate other, non-whites or whatever. It's just absolutely ridiculous, the word games that they play. But that's it in a nutshell, is they're the most cohesive group. And Again, I wouldn't deny that there's, Catholics or Jesuits or whatever involved in the CIA, for example, or in, high positions of power and influence in the United States government. I would argue, though, that the organized Jewish community has basically controlled the direction of U.S. policy for a very, very long time. And that was very evident in the aftermath of 9/11. I mean, if we just look at who was responsible for 9/11, maybe we could start there. I mean, all of the key individuals that were responsible for investigating it, which was really covering it up essentially and creating this official narrative, almost all of them were Jews. The only people that were actually arrested on 9/11 that had connections to what was actually taking place were these Israeli Mossad, like military, like undercover military guys who had trainings in explosives and other things. And there's police reports that prove this. This was reported widely at the time, even Fox News and other mainstream sources. It's largely been covered up now. But, at the time, you could find this information easily. You can still find a police report of these guys that got arrested. There was, in fact, a nationwide network of these Israeli Mossad operatives that were arrested leading up to and in the aftermath of 9/11. If you look at the World Trade Center complex itself, Larry Silverstein was one of the key owners. The way it was privatized and allowed for Silverstein to ultimately purchase was basically done by a corrupt network of Jews in the state of New York. If you look at the Bush administration itself, many of the key players, certainly in the Pentagon, were Jewish, neoconservative, Israel first Zionists. And their primary loyalty lay with Israel and advancing Israel's geopolitical interests in the Middle East. And again, that's exactly what the global war on terrorism is all about. In fact, Benjamin Netanyahu, the current Israeli prime minister, and he's been, a longtime player in Israeli national politics going back decades. In 1979, he organized a conference on international terrorism where they sort of laid out the strategy that Western nations needed to pursue. And of course, it's these Zionist supremacists in the Middle East basically using the military might of the West to advance their own interests in the region. That's basically what the war on terrorism has been all about from day one. So, I don't know. I mean, Johnny, do you concede the role that Jews played in 9/11, or are you claiming that it was like Jesuits behind 9/11 too?
I would say, and here's what's important, John, if you need a minute, take the minute and pull up the police report, names, places, and dates. Let's stick with hard, cold facts. For me, what I have found is that these key Jews, Silverstein took over like 7 months before. It was very obvious he was the Jew left holding the bag. What I have found is that for the most part, these Jews are managers and patsies. They are made easy targets because of the tribalism that you mentioned. And for me personally, I know that there are people who are equally angry over this divisive, and they use words. Somebody that I used to study with, a guy by the name of Eric Phelps, is also very prominent in saying that white Christians are being beat down. I avoid that because I know that is what the machine, this is intuitive. So if you are in control, and I think we can agree that whoever's in control, they've stolen all the resources, they've stolen all the power, they have the eavesdropping, they have the internet. It is only intuitive. We see this in Hollywood and science fiction and movies. They have predicted this. They knew this was going to come. They knew that people were going to start asking questions. It only makes sense that they would lay out minefields and put patsies up to dissuade us and distract us and get us full of emotion and anger and hatred and disconnect from critical thinking, which is why I say focus on names, places, and dates. You look at a city like New York City or a state like New York. New York is absolutely owned by the Catholic Church. You look at families like the Kumos. Fake and I were talking about this before we started. The Trudeaus, pervert, deviant, far-left Roman Catholics, just like the Kumos, father and son, handing power over. There's nobody else qualified to be prime minister in Canada than Justin Castro Trudeau, the far left Roman Catholic son. His stepfather probably of far left Roman Catholic Pierre Trudeau. And based on a lot of information I've seen, I believe that Fidel Castro is his real father. But the same thing in New York. The Kumos, Andrew Cuomo, an arch criminal. He should be awaiting execution for mass murder of the elderly during the pandemic and in the elderly homes, which, by the way, were created by the Catholic Church. Andrew Cuomo, while he was first he was prosecutor, first he was attorney general, what a position of power that is, and then he ascended to become the governor, following his father, Mario Cuomo, a far left Roman Catholic. He stepped down, and instead of being arrested, they simply had a female version of him take over. Hochul, I forget her name. She's worse than he is.
Kathy Hochul.
Kathy Hochul, and while Andrew Cuomo was there in the governor's mansion, his brother was on CNN. So you have this 1-2 punch of power and propaganda giving cover for the Catholic Church. I mentioned how the hospice was a Roman Catholic idea. Nathaniel Hawthorne, who was not Catholic, his daughter, what was her, Mary Alphonse Rose, because when you become a nun, was a clergy, a Roman Catholic nun, she created this idea of a hospice, of sending people that you don't want to bother with, loved family members, to have some place for them to die in peace. And actually, it's an abattoir. It's where they were murdered. So names for Abu Ghraib, for instance, we're talking about the global war. I was in Abu Ghraib. I was in Abu Ghraib right after a suicide bombing. And to me, as I look on Abu Ghraib and the crimes that happened, was this an army unit, a bunch of wackos, a bunch of Satanists out of control, a bunch of masochists? No, it was clearly the Inquisition. So anyway, names, places, names. I am finding that these Jews that we talk about are managers. Take a guy like George Soros, who is the epitome of the evil managing Jews. Do you know what brought him into fame and power and fortune? He was adopted by a Catholic Hungarian family, and he went around pretending to be Catholic during World War II at a 14-year-old, and he collected with his Catholic family the property of Jews who were arrested by the Gestapo, he told 60 Minutes it was the best time of his life, happiest time of his life. This is a perfect example of the Jews, the puppets. So, like I said, it's intuitive. If there's somebody in control, would it not be intuitive for them to put up patsies of distraction for us to focus on? I'll shut up and let John.
That was exactly